Simon, nice to see you again. When you talk about, your company, and you use the term that you're sort of a catalyst for net zero, what do you mean by that?
Fundamentally, just that we kind of need to be an organisation that precipitates action. It needs to be action oriented in terms of what we're doing, what the industry's doing. There's a real challenge around the level of action that actually comes out of providing advice in relation to net zero, and so we kind of premise the fact that everything we need to do needs to be focused on creating that action. I think just literally kind of the same meaning as it has in chemistry of something that precipitates an event. So
Excellent. You're taking me back 35 years. That's terrifying. I mean, we've seen lately the government has pretty much nailed its colours to the mast. At the time of recording today, Ofgem have promised 40 billion for the next Rio period for principally putting in electrification of heat and transport. Boris has said, 68% cut by 1990. So from 1990 levels by 2030. So if you look at it all, you'd say a lot of things are happening very quickly right now. Do you see still barriers to getting people on the net zero pathway?
I think that it's great to see all the announcements, and the policy shift is really, really important to see. But I think that we're not, within the mix of all of that, we're not necessarily focusing on the fact that there are some structural barriers behind the way we deliver as an energy sector and the wider sustainability professional sector. There is a
what sort of barriers are you talking about?
I think, for principally, I kind of see it as three areas that you really we almost struggle a bit with. One, there are some structural flaws, namely things like some of the standardization industry, the whole pence per unit remuneration model typical of brokers. Usability, we've got a real issue about making sure things are actually kind of readable and usable by the end user, and we've almost got some things that are just the way they are because they always have been, and not because they're fit for purpose. And then I think there is also a big skills question. It's great to see the policy commitments, but delivering that system transition that the energy sector will experience, and the economy-wide transition that the net zero target creates, requires skills. We know that the government reckons that there'll be 5 times as many jobs in the next decade, and it's great to know the jobs will exist, but if we've got the right people to fill them.
When you talk about your first point there, which is about structurally, I mean, what are you talking about specifically that's wrong there? When you brought in the sort of financial model in some ways, you're questioning that, are you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is a fundamental challenge about the fact that to deliver what is realistically the response to the greatest challenge mankind's ever faced, in the sense that's what we're rising to with climate change, that we've got to have all of our incentives in the right place. And I think that the way in which the energy sector conduit to the customer, which is generally the broker or consultant, is commonly remunerated by a pence per hour, pence per kilowatt hour rate, that causes a real set of challenges around a perverse incentive. And I think the industry's got to ask itself some questions about how it can have its intent in the right place if that carries on to be the way that it's remuneration. Because if you're going to create an existential threat to your existence in time by people using less, because however much we're transitioning,
no, I get where you're coming from.
Technologies, we're still going to end up with less kilowatt hours. So,
so you think the fundamental remuneration model will have to change? Because I can see that brokers could play a very big part in facilitating this and working with suppliers. But are you saying that actually the way they get paid, you're not saying get rid of them, I assume? You're saying
no,
look at the different model.
Absolutely, far from it. I don't think it's a case of getting rid of the people. I think and those constituents in the industry. I think it's the reality is that to have somebody who's going to support you on this journey, you've got to build trust. And I think that it becomes very difficult for an end customer to see how you being paid for when there's more usage works when you're trying to create less. And I think obviously there are some variations that are created by the transport transition there with electrification on that side, but I think you're going to find a lot more of that is at home and in the public network. So when you talk about industrial and commercial customers particularly, you're going to need to focus on them using less. And I think you've therefore got to look at different models to that. You've got to start looking at how you play a part as a strategic partner rather than it potentially pushing towards transactional behavior.
You mentioned the usability of what we do. What do you mean by that?
If you take the kind of age-old QWERTY keyboard, where like it was designed to slow typewriters down, I think there's some things where we've got legacy things that were designed in the industry that aren't fit for purpose for what we do. I think the example I use most commonly with people is the way we present energy audits. They're still the way they are because that's the way the old Action Energy and Carbon Trust template was designed. And we've not, as an industry, generally changed that format since. It's not written out as a net zero plan. It's not necessarily presented to the user in any more meaningful way than it was 20, 30 years ago. It's still principally the same style and content. And given that we know from things like the Public Accounts Committee review of the Carbon Trust surveys that the adoption rate of those was quite poor by comparison to other sectors, we've got to ask ourselves some questions about the way we design the industry. Are we leaving ourselves with the equivalent of a QWERTY keyboard where we know that we're slowing ourselves down?
Is this, don't want to compare you to Steve Jobs, but that sort of Jobs thing where he just said, let's make it simpler. Let's do things that work for the end user. Is that what you're saying? That as we fundamentally shift, and we've all got to shift towards net zero, you've got to take everyone on the journey. And I do get it that bureaucracy, certain ways of working can be a barrier to that. Are you saying fundamentally we're going to have to look at how we even just translate this information into a way that people can use it?
Absolutely. I think we've got to do a bit of searching about standards. I mean, look, the ability of the industry to agree a standard on billing, etc., through Ofgem and standards around and codes of conduct has been challenging. To try and get, we've got a standardization challenge to look at. I think we've got to look at the way we communicate in terms of it being about the end user. A lot of feedback that I've experienced over the years around those kind of reports is they're not accessible to the lay intelligent person.
Yes.
They're not.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And I think we've all got to ask ourselves how you shift that so that we've got the end user of this in mind. Because if we don't, pretty much every plan about net zero has got to be set in stone in the next decade. So if we're not in the next few years shifting towards being more usable as an industry, then you're going to get people who will out innovate the disruptors who'll come in and who will spot these challenges and who will I think it's in everybody's interest to start kind of reflecting upon themselves and figuring out how to do it a better way.
If we're going to do all this, we're going to need, I don't know whether we new people, different people, but we're certainly going to have different skills. I mean, we started at the top talking about the recent government announcements, again, quoting Boris, we're going to be the Saudi Arabia of wind, all very well, but there are vast areas where we just don't have the skill base right now for the vision we have. What is your view about how we need to address that and also the mindset around it?
I think skills-wise, it's a big challenge. I mean, recruiting people now is pretty tough in the grand scheme of things, and doing it in a decade's time when there's meant to be 5 times as many jobs filled, I think is a real challenge for a lot of people. And I think we have got to look at the skills mix of that. I think when you look at individual subsectors of net zero, then there are good answers around some of the work that individual institutions are doing, the Energy Institute, IEMA, and so on. But if you look at the overarching side of it, to try and get businesses to understand this, I think there's a real skills gap there. There's no singular allied net zero institute. You have to go to 4 or 5 to get to the answers to the question. There's no clear competency pathway around what those people who are advising on strategy or doing the finance behind this needs to have. And so I think there's some real challenges there that we've all got to look at. I mean, we've had to develop our own competency framework as a business because there isn't a singular one out there, and we've had to go everywhere through IEMA, CIPSI, Energy Institute, to also people like SEMA as accountants and that kind of, because you've got to merge it all together and get to a singular answer. And I think there's a sector level of acknowledging the skills challenges in front of us. I think the other bit you mentioned, mindset, that's really important too. I think my view is that net zero and sustainability are not something to do, but they're something to be. So it's about a sense of identity and coaching people to that. I think if you've got to create a set of people who can do that coaching. So that you're going to need to have people who've got an experience of doing kind of change management in other places. And I think, are you going to need new people? Are you going to people who come from allied industries? I think you're going to need all of them, is the honest answer. I think this is going to be one of the most rapid transitions of skill sets that has ever occurred, and I think we're all going to have to play a part in that. But I think I suppose one of the questions I'm asking around all these different pieces is, are we ready for it yet? Because I'm not sure we are, in terms of the structures that sit behind it. And I think it's when you get to actually, whenever you take on a new challenge, we've just gone through this as a country earlier in the year with COVID, and you can prep all you like and do disaster scenarios and so on, but the moment these things actually hit you, all of a sudden you're like, yeah, okay, we didn't have the answer here. And I think we have to ask ourselves similar questions about how ready we are. Are we staying focused on the end goal in mind the whole way through, and are we making it easy for individual people? Because this isn't just something that we change the system for. This is something where every single person has to come with us, and I think creating that level of societal change requires a mindset shift too, not just a skills one. Yeah,
no, I would agree with that. Obviously, thank you for joining us on Future Net Zero and being part of what we're trying to create with this movement with Getting Business Together. And, you know, we've launched the standard, which is trying to get sort of people doing sort of their basic first steps in carbon footprinting. If you look at where we've got to go, what would you say would be the clear kind of, if you're going to say 3 things for a business person that's watching this to change and commit themselves to this, what would be the 3 things you'd say that you need to really just take away and go, look, do these simply? Because as you said, there's so much information out there. We're trying to clear it up. We've got this 101 that we're trying to make things easier. You do lots of stuff around in communication. We know you do that as well brilliantly. So, you know, there are voices out there. But if you're a business person, you just want to say, right, Simon, what are the 3 things I kind of need to take away if I want to do this? What would you say?
Get your carbon footprint done, because I think you need to understand where you go, where you are and where you're going, and which levers you need to pull. Switch to renewable energy, and proper renewable energy, so you're contributing to the system. I'll leave for a separate topic to explain what I mean by proper renewable energy. And the easy wins on energy efficiency, because so many of them are still out there. There's still so many small things that need to be done. There's all these other aspects that are there, but there's so many people who still haven't done those 3 things. So
when you're having conversations, just to end with, are people a bit more receptive than they were maybe a year, 2 years ago?
Absolutely. I think the transitions we've seen over the course of the last 2 years, particularly, where culturally this has become a much higher priority for everyone. It's be it so much of it seems to be allied to individual events, the school strikes, the plastics piece. Whilst it's not about climate change, the Attenborough moment, those things make a big difference. Has net zero itself had its Attenborough moment yet? No, I don't think necessarily on that full scale. We haven't quite got the level of adoption of plastics and that side, but I think it will come. I think there's a huge transition, and we're certainly seeing a rapid acceleration in terms of people's work on this. I'd say that kind of activity levels in terms of the kind of projects people have got in, the level of investment is probably doubling per year now, in terms of on an aggregate basis across all the 100-ish clients that we'll be servicing each year. So, yeah. So
hopefully we are on our way.
Absolutely. No, we're on our way, but I think there's plenty to ask ourselves. And I think what I kind of talked about today is there's some challenges for us to show up to now to make sure we're ready for the future. So.